Hello, I'm alone in Finland. This is Eve Online, and I thought I would make a bit of a follow up video to the previous video. I got a lot of feedback in various different types and forms and stuff like that, but on YouTube, on Reddit, good, bad, indifferent, and lots of different explanations. And I thought I would go through some of this stuff because some of it was very interesting to me. Actually, a lot of it was very interesting to me, both in content and sort of perspective and things like this. So what I wanted to do was to go through the more interesting stuff, like information-wise on how people generate money in the beginning, and then at the end sort of go through what I was sort of saying in the last video, because I am aware that one of the things that I didn't do too well in that video was I was trying to talk about a specific thing, which is these sort of videos where they say that you can do this particular activity in a certain way and generate a lot of ISK, but they don't talk about any of the dangers of it. So the example I was giving was the wormhole things, and some of it is also Abyssal and stuff like that, where people show this nice flashy stuff that requires a lot of setup and a lot of sort of skill and knowledge to be able to do, but they portray it as anybody could do this. So you could get somebody coming into the community that sees a video like this, because this was one of the first videos I saw on a brand new YouTube account, and they would see that and then buy the game and possibly buy Plex and invest in the game, and then lose it all in a heartbeat and hate the game and leave, which is also posts that I've seen where this has happened. So this is kind of what triggered it. But to begin with, let's go through some of these posts because they are very interesting to me, how in general people make money. Now, at the very beginning of that, there is a lot of people who have responded that they don't make money, and that's perfectly fine, that they play the game for enjoyment. Somebody said, I play PvE, I don't play PvE, therefore I don't make any money, which is completely legitimate. A lot of people have said that they don't make enough to sort of pay for a subscription, they don't make high amounts, they just do what they enjoy, whether that's PvE, exploration. A lot of people responding about mining as an enjoyment thing, and I get that because of the community around it. What I don't kind of get is the solo miners that were talking about it. There was one particular guy contacted me that was, he was just a solo miner, and he was saying he just kind of likes that. But one stands out. There was a message that I got on Reddit. Somebody was talking about this because he actually, as he said it, he liked the video because there's a lot of people in his corp that are very much, they talk about how much ISK they generate per hour, and it kind of annoys him. And the reason it annoys him is this, and this is the part that caught me, is that this particular gentleman generates, he pays for his accounts. He has multiple accounts and he pays for them every month. He also buys ISK every month, and he sort of told me how much he was buying, and he uses that to fund his corp. So the station that they have in Wormhole Sec is paid for by him. They run several alt accounts. He basically had 6 accounts that he was paying for and funding, and he doesn't really have enough time to do anything aside from that, which is fair play. So when he's playing the game, he's actively helping these people, but he explained it, and essentially he's paying about £300 per month, which is about $350 or €350 if you're in other places, and that is what he pays out per month. But he's funding their entire operation. So when these guys are saying, I'm generating all of this and I'm doing it myself, they're covered by him. And there's that disconnect there, which I find very interesting, and I'll get back to the disconnect because it's come up a few times. But I want you to keep that in mind as we're sort of going through this. That was one of the more interesting ones. However, somebody else put this very nicely. Yona82 on Reddit specifically said, the key to becoming ISK positive is minimising risk. Usually the activities that give you high rewards, or at least the chance of it, are implying higher risk, or the amount of preparation needed for success. And that is the perfect summary of what I was trying to say before. There are ways of generating a phenomenal amount of risk, a phenomenal amount of ISK, but also they generate a phenomenal amount of risk. So if you're in Wormhole Sec, you've got that attached. And as I was sort of explaining in the last video, you've also got setup times and things like that, whether it's time or ISK that you need to put into these things. A lot of us that have played the game for a while have a complete sort of, we don't think about it because we've got it already, so you don't need to think about it. And my point with this whole sort of exercise is that I would like the people coming into Eve to get more of an accurate version of it, and a lot of the videos that come up as the primary things that come up when you search Eve, or I searched for one Eve video when I had this new account, and bear in mind, brand new Google account, brand new YouTube account, on a fresh computer, no cookies or anything like that. And the first video it showed me was this guy sort of doing this 300 million per hour, but not mentioning anything behind it, not mentioning that he had a corp, not mentioning that he had to roll the wormholes or any of that jazz. So it was that disconnect in that particular video. And the guy in question, and the reason I didn't name him, as I've said, he's done other videos on things like that, but the disconnect in one particular video, when all videos can be seen entirely out of context, and they are the advertisements essentially for our game and our community. It's us advertising what it is. So I kind of wanted to address that in general, and sort of, well, basically share my opinion on it and get feedback, which, thanks again, everybody that's given me feedback. It's always appreciated. Now, next on this, there was a tip that I didn't know. Obviously, as I've said, I've sort of been started 18 years ago properly, and there have been a couple of gaps. And I came back in at the beginning of Abyssal space, but then had another gap after that because I've had kids and all sorts of problems and stuff like that. And somebody left this tip, and I just wanted to share it because I think this is absolutely fantastic, especially when we're talking about wormholes, as a lot of this seems to be centered around, although it wasn't intentional. One of the gentlemen that said it was Blackhawk-388 on Reddit that had mentioned this, and I think it's absolutely brilliant. He said when he's doing wormhole, going down wormholes, he goes down wormhole chains, so he lives on HiSec and he goes down chains to explore. And one of the things he does is he carries Pochvan filaments so that he can, from the wormholes, jump to Pochvan, and then from Pochvan jump back to HiSec. And I had not even thought about that. I didn't even realise that was possible. I've been on Pochvan a couple of times. I missed the whole thing where that happened, which irks me because I usually get all of the updates and stuff like this, but somehow I missed it. But it's a very interesting thing, and I think that's a fantastic technique. If you want to do the wormhole stuff and you get concerned about getting stuck there for a while, that's your easy out and your easy back to HiSec if you want to, or even low-sec or null-sec, if you want to do that sort of, to try it, but then have a quick out. So I just wanted to mention that. Blackhawk-388 on Reddit gave that tip, and I think it's absolutely genius. I'm going to use it and try it. Now, as I'm talking here, you can see me running stuff in the background, because I also wanted to talk about the amount of ISK you can generate just easily, sort of calmly. Now, I've sort of essentially set myself an hour's timer, and I'm just running missions. Which the irony being that when I was mentioning in the last video about the fact I had run for 28 hours and didn't have a single burner mission, before I started this I got a burner mission, and then I had a break of about an hour, and when I came back and decided to do this little section of filming, I got another burner mission and then another burner mission. So I thought it was a good thing to sort of show just an average income and sort of all of the ways around it from missioning, because this is sort of a common one that a lot of people get, and it's a good idea to show it. Now, I'm using blingy ships because I've got them all set up there. The hammer that I've got, the golem that I use, that is about 4 point something billion. So when you're running, you can run all of the missions I'm running in a standard Raven, but you have to think a bit more about them, and I was watching TV while I was doing this, so as I'm watching something else, it's better to have something that's more practiced, and this golem I've had for years and years. It's a good setup to get to, but I used to run all of these in a standard Raven, and I thought it was a very good thing there. The other ships that sort of come up are, as you can see, the Sanipag with wings, which is the the Balgerst, is it? I think that's the name of it. The Mordor's Legion battleship. That one is about 1.5 billion, and it's just a kite, and it's fantastic. You can do almost every mission in it. You warp in, bolt out with a micro warp drive, and then just keep orbiting. It can't run the tank permanently, which you'll sort of see towards the end, but it does almost every mission in roughly the same way. It's got about half of the DPS, but it's also got a hell of a lot more primary hit than the golem, so it can wipe out targets a lot faster when you're doing the smaller stuff. And then I've got a couple of mission specific setups. Now mine is a more expensive setup when it comes to these ships for running the burner missions, because I set them up a long time ago, probably when the burners came out, and I went through. There is a particular burner guide. If you just search for the burner blitzing, you will find the guide, and it's not the same as it used to be. I've recently searched for it, which is why I take a bit of a time sort of looking at these missions, because the setups have changed for a lot of things. But I still have these, so there's no real point in changing them. However, somebody's created a setup for an Ergal that will do all of the solo burner missions, and then somebody else setup came with a couple of different setups. So instead of having, as you can see when we're in the station, I have 10 separate ships for running all of the burner missions quickly, and I jump between them. Obviously I use for the primary one, I use the Mordor's Legion frigate, and I just swap out the ammo types, because for the multiples, the people's team, that's it, annual teams, and I just sort of swap them out, and that's not too expensive a fit. It's 120 million or something, and it's polarized, but it is polarized, so you need to know what you're doing with these. You need to be able to know the mission in advance. So that's the sort of preparation you need to put into these, is just sort of reading through the guide beforehand. Don't read through it as you're doing the mission, because you'll die, and especially in a polarized ship with 0 resists, you are a glass cannon, nothing else. Now, slightly back onto the disconnect that people were talking that I had mentioned that people had sort of come up with. There was an awful lot of people who said the same sort of comments, and it came back to wormholes an awful lot, where they said, oh well, I make this amount, so it's definitely possible, and I do it. There were so many people that mentioned C3 wormholes, and a lot of people that were talking about this, they were saying, I do this solo. But then they were talking about the ships and things like this that they were using, and so they've obviously got a corp there. And it's not solo if you've got a corp that's isolated the system. Yes, you're running that site solo, but you couldn't run that site solo if you were in a newbie corp with no friends. And that's the disconnect that I think a lot of people have missed. There was one guy that said, these are easily achievable as a new person, and these are the examples of what I do. And the next thing was a couple of bullet point list, that the third option was like Dreadnought, and I'm like, new player and Dreadnought don't go together. Like, unless you're skill injecting like an MF, then that's sort of where it is. It's kind of weird to see that disconnect where somebody doesn't realise that they've put them together. Now, I do get why. I don't want to be nasty to anybody about those things. I'm not listing those comments, because it's all good. It's good to challenge somebody's thing, and I get why people have that disconnect, because if you've played for years, you don't think about the skills that you already have. You've had them for years. My primary battleship skills were finished. I got to the highest level of battleship for Caldari in 2005. So I've not thought about the skill levels for those in Jesus 19 years. So that's a sort of a little bit I wanted to mention about that sort of disconnect. Now, a lot of the things that were mentioned for earning money, I've sort of talked about the missioning that I'm sort of showing in the background, and a lot of people mentioned Abyssal space. Now, a lot of people, again, this is where the disconnect come up, a lot of people mentioned Abyssal space with multiple frigates and multiple accounts. Now, so 3 frigates running an Abyssal. Now, this is not something I'm familiar with personally. I've always run Abyssal in a cruiser, and I've not really, once I got my setup sorted, I haven't really looked back at that sort of thing, and I haven't been in the sort of EVE Online video crowd for a while, where I've been watching these videos. So I haven't sort of seen these newer ideas of setups and fits for these things. So I didn't know about that at all. But I also think that's sort of disqualifying with the point I'm trying to put across, because what I'm talking about is putting something forward to new players. And sure enough, if you're putting a video forward that shows these are the 3 things that I'm doing at the same time, that's fair enough. But a new player is not expected to join a game, see a video on YouTube, join a game, and then immediately join the game by starting up 6 accounts. And one of the guys was talking about it. This is easy, you can do it, it's brand new. You only need 3 for the system and then 6 for the guard. And it's like, you're talking about multi-boxing 9 accounts at the same time as an easy beginner tool. If you're single monitored and you're alt-tabbing through them, that's not something that's easy to get a grip with beginning. It is easy once you get practice on it, but at the beginning it's not. So it's not something that's accessible to most, be it skills, money-wise, or specifically that sort of mental skill, not an in-game skill, that mental skill to alt-tab through things that fast and keep an eye on what everything is doing. But that, and another one that came up with the same thing was where somebody says that somebody had talked about running T6s, and somebody said, I don't think, this is almost exactly the quote, I don't think you should do that as something you should start with. You should start with T5 Abyssal Space. And I'm reading this going, no you shouldn't. You should start with T1. If you're a new person to the game, you start at the bottom and learn, especially in Abyssal, because you can lose so much stuff. And that's kind of my point. Giving somebody a new person advice to start at T5 is throwing them into the meat grinder knowing they're going to get ground. So it's that sort of, that odd disconnect of, oh, I run T6s and T5s are easy. Now that I know about T6s and I can run them. For me, T5s, I haven't really run any T6s. T5s are sort of where I make a bit of money and things like that. But T3s were where I was comfortable because it was back when the whole flagging thing was still going on, so T5s didn't have much of an issue with flagging. T3, sorry, didn't have much of an issue with flagging, so that's where I got my comfort level. I did a 1, a 2, I ran a couple of 2s just to make sure, and then I ran a 3, and I think I lost one ship because my rabbit started fighting with another rabbit, bleeding wife's pets, and I had to go and separate them and came back and the Gila had been destroyed. That's a funny one on a kill board. But I lost 1 or 2 ships. I lost another ship because of a disconnect. I've actually had that disconnect problem twice. It was because of where I was living. So my bad, it's on my side. But at one of them, the disconnect happened, and then it came. I managed to reconnect while I was still flying and still locked in Abyssal Space and managed to get out of it. So that was all fine. But this is what I'm sort of saying is, it's good to start at the lower end. And it's good for that advice to be sort of, if you've got advice to give, try and think back to when you started and then sort of portray it that way. Or if you want to talk about something that's more advanced, just mention that at the beginning of the video. This is quite an advanced thing. You might need this sort of setup and this sort of thing. It is quite expensive, etc., etc. So that you're giving notice to the viewership, because a lot of us go out there and we'll see something interesting and buy the game and play the game with no real knowledge of it. And if it's something where there's nothing to be lost, then that's fine. If you're playing Battlefield or you're playing a multiplayer that has no loss in it, that's alright. But EVE can be a thing where you put in time and money, and some people put in a lot of money. And it's kind of worrying to me how much goes in, but at the same time they're supporting the community, and if that's your jam, then rock on. I don't want to mess with it. Now, some of the other methods that were mentioned were low-sec ratting, which obviously pays quite well. You want to go out in a cloaky that can hit hard, learn about the gate camps beforehand, or possibly pass through Wormhole space to get to Low sec, null sec is what I meant to say. But that's a good way of earning ISK. Something that came up in the forums as I want to move into mining, because a lot of people talk about mining, and mining in high sec is non-existent for profit. But it can be fun, and maybe you need the minerals and stuff like that. I don't want to mess with anybody's thing. But there was an interesting one on the forum where somebody had said about mining high sec Veld, and they had said the person asking the question on the Eve forums was specifically talking about, I'm a new player, I'm on my own, and they had actually gone so far as to say that I play on a single account. And there was a bit of a discussion going on after this, and then somebody said, look, this is how much I make from mining, it's easy. And they gave like a list of high sec, low sec, and null sec and wormhole, what they were mining and how much they were making. And when I looked at the list, the wormhole made sense for a solo person, because they were gas huffing. However, the stuff in high sec was the one that stood out to me, because they mentioned mining Veld in high sec. So if you're mining Veldspot on high sec, you expect to be making sort of 20 million if you're well fit. And this person had put in 60 million, which isn't possible with a solo character. My mining character's fully skilled in everything, and they can't make that mining, even with an orca boosting them. So there was a disconnect there, and I'm assuming the person that given a comment was multi-boxing. But when I then looked at some of the other things, I was like, that person's definitely multi-boxing, and they're not considering that as how much they're making. They're just counting what they're making and not realising that there's an extra step in there, one that's actually been disqualified by the person talking about it. So I think it's interesting to sort of to think about that as we're putting it forward, because a lot of things have come up, and as I was reading through especially the comments on Reddit, there are so many people that made comments about this is easy, and then went to list something that requires corporation support or requires very high assets. And somebody who was very nice, we're having a bit of a discussion, had said about running Abyssal space, and they said, oh, I run T6s in a nice cheap ship, and then said a ship that's 3 billion. Now that's a perspective issue as opposed to a disconnect the way I'm describing it. But for me, if you're talking about more than 1 month's gaming subscription in Plex to ISK for a ship, then you're not talking for a cheap ship. You're talking a ship that costs sort of 50 quid real world. That's not cheap. A cheap ship is something like 100 million Raven, 150 million Raven. Back in the days when they were 150 million. Now they're like 300 and something. So I would consider a Raven to be a decently fit Raven for level 4s. The sort of level of where cheapness would be, because it's something that's utilitarian, that a lot of people can use, and it's kind of the benchmark for a normal ship as opposed to faction or things like this. But when you start getting into several billion for your fit, that no longer becomes cheap, and I think that's something that especially higher generators of ISK don't sort of think about. They're like, oh, I can just throw that away because I'm generating so much. But a lot of people don't do that. As I said before in the last video, if everybody was making over $1.5 billion per month, then nobody would have to pay for their subscription. If they were making over $2.5 billion a month, then most people would be able to keep themselves in shiny ships and new stuff on a regular basis and not pay for their subscription. So that's sort of an interesting point on perspective as opposed to the disconnect I'm talking about. So then comes, actually that particular, I was about to say then comes the biggest response, but the biggest response was actually from a whole load of people that run C3 wormholes that had said, oh, I do this, it's easy. I'm based in C3 and I do this. And that's why C3 wormholes comes up so much when I'm thinking about this, because I've read so many comments about it. And obviously if you're in a wormhole corp, there's a corp around about you. That's sort of, that's implied, or that's automatically implied in what you're saying, but not automatically obvious to a new player. And this is where I kind of want to put this forward. So the next most sort of common thing was people said, I play for fun. I don't care about the money, and that's it. As I've said before, there's people that have put that pay their subscription and buy their ISK to play the game. Not all of us have time. Jesus, I didn't have time. I'd actually sort of come out of Eve when I had my kids, because there was no time when we got two kids running around for several years. So that sort of thing I can completely understand. It's changed the game fundamentally, not all in ways that I like, but it's also made the game more accessible for some people, and I can sort of appreciate that and things like that. So there's lots of different sort of ways of doing it, but the most important in my mind is, are you having fun? Because that's not a common thing. I've seen a lot of people talking about, oh, I got stuck in this grind in the game, and my head kind of goes, why are you still playing it then? Because I can understand wanting to generate ISK to maintain your account, but if you're only generating ISK to maintain your account, then what's the point of maintaining your account if you're just playing to keep it up, sort of thing? So if that's you, think about it a bit more. I don't want to push anybody out of Eve, but if you're not enjoying your time with it, then maybe a different path is needed. Or different options within Eve, because say for instance, if you have to grind to maintain your account, then how about looking at a corp that would help you with the grind, so that you could make a bit more a bit faster, and then sort of have a bit more free time to do things and sort of join a community that way. Because a lot of people that were saying that seem to be more the solo road. They had come out of the corps and the alliances, kind of like me, but I still do weird stuff that I enjoy. Now, with all that being said, answering the question, how much ISK is normal, to clarify that question a little bit, if you're playing the game for enjoyment, it doesn't matter. If you're playing the game specifically to make ISK, like, not constantly, but if you're in that point to make ISK, then the common thread on Reddit seems to be 100 to 200 million an hour. This is what has come up. These are for skilled players who have played a lot. Everybody seems to have at least 5 years of experience, and a lot of people have said in general that sort of 75 mil to 300 mil an hour is where they're sort of at if they have skills. If they're doing low sec ratting, if they're doing gas mining and nullsec, if they're doing level 4 missions, and exploration. Sort of, I'd say 75 to 200 is a sort of good consensus on what a lot of people are sort of talking about and general experiencing. Obviously, there's a lot of people that are making higher than that, but the vast majority, that's where, if you're going out to generate ISK, that's where they sort of expect it to be. And certain activities have a higher sort of reliance for that ISK. So for instance, if you're running level 4 missions, you know it's mission. If you're running exploration, then time matters, location matters, and then you've got RNGs to deal with. Sometimes you can run exploration for hours and not come across anything. Sometimes you can hit 2 or 3 good runs in a one time. If you're running level 4 missions, if you're at the low end and you want a little bit of extra cash, remember to take along a tractor unit with you and harvest your stuff. Most level 4 missions give you about 5 mil per mission. The burner missions are hit or miss. Sometimes you get nothing, sometimes you get usually a warp disruptor unit. High tier, I've forgotten what they call them. You know, the heavy warp disruptors anyways. Those usually drop worth about 5 million per time. I got one of them on one of these missions, and then I think I got one a little while later. It was almost the same one that I got, and it was worth about the same thing. So that gives you an extra sort of 5 mil per hour. As I was running through this, you will see that there was a mistake to the end where I thought I'd killed all the rats I needed to, and I missed the ones because you only needed to do one group on this last mission. So I warped back out. But at the point where I had gotten back to the station, I was at 1 hour and 2 minutes time running this. And in general, you sort of see through calculations that, including converting the LP into an actual sellable item, and going through the actual value that you have up in Jita, the haul for about an hour was about 180 million. Now, that should also be taken with a sort of pinch of salt. I got a couple of burners in there, and I'm running with higher end ships. So I would say that about 100 million an hour for level 4 ratting is a sort of an understandable amount to get if you are running something with sort of lower skills and standard battleships as opposed to the ridiculous golem I've got, which isn't that ridiculous, unfortunately. I've seen a few people saying, "Oh my god, that you can do this much better," and I was just sat there going, no, I don't want something that's worth half of my net value to be my ratting ship. That's just asking for a gank. So with all of that, I'd like to say thank you. Thank you to everybody that commented. Thank you to the everybody that commented on YouTube and Reddit, and the people that give us some engagement and some feedback and things like that. I loved absolutely all of it. As I say, if you want a question answered, then you might get it answered if you put the question on the internet. But if you just put your opinion on the internet, then you'll get a far better answer and a lot more of it. So it's always a good thing to do, and I quite like doing that. Thank you for the engagement. There was some fantastic tips in there. Some interesting stuff and interesting feedback, and it was also nice to see that sort of that variety through everybody that's watching it, from your Wormhole thumpers all the way down through Abyssal runners, and then the high sec miner that has spent 4 years in adventure. That, oh my god, you break my heart, man. But if it's what you do, I don't want to yuck your yum. That is fantastic. That's what the game's all about. And I'd just like to sort of summarise this by saying what I'm trying to do here, in general, not just with the videos but with the channel, is that I've seen that the player count in EVE is going down, and I actually got a little more worried about that than normal when I started getting a lot of these answers about how many people are multi-boxing. For me personally, I've known people that have left the game because of some of the issues with it. And I think it might be an idea to start looking at more of the solo or the newer focus in the game, because the existing players, everybody that's here watching that has sort of established themselves in the game, eventually you guys will leave. And I'd like the game to continue for us of those that remain after some of us leave, because everybody's life changes, and maybe I'll be playing EVE Online at 80 years old. Maybe not, but I would like to think it's an option, and we sort of need new blood for that. And the problem is that it's getting harder and harder for people to come into the game, and some of that is a bit of that disconnect from the older players as to how they represent the game, but some of it is also that the big alliances and the multiple player factions and corporations and things like that get a lot of the love when it comes to updates and things like that, and the solo player, by its very existence, by its nature, doesn't get much of that. We're not really represented on the council when it comes to talking to EVE, because we don't vote on the council, because we're solo players. We don't really know any other solo players. Some people that are on YouTube might manage it. Wingspan was somebody that did it, but then he turned into a corporation player and then a bigger sort of Wingspan delivery guy. I don't even know if he's still playing the game, because I haven't paid attention to it in a while. But not many of us that come in that prefer this sort of lower solo experience are paid attention to. And actually, if you have a look on the ideas and suggestions forum, about whenever somebody makes a comment about something for the solo player existence, go down that thread and see how much hatred comes towards it from the existing player groups. That sort of summarises the opinion that some people have towards the solo players in the multiplayer game, even though they can be sort of a backbone and in some cases the majority of players. I'm not sure whether that's true in EVE or not. They've never properly sort of paid attention to it, but it's something interesting to have a look at. So that's kind of where I'm at and what I would like to do, and why I sort of started this channel. As I say, it's not something I want to I'd like it to grow, but I don't really care about monetizing it or anything like that. It's just a hobby. And hopefully it's a helpful hobby for Eve as a community and as a game. So, thanks for watching. Reply, share your thoughts, share your opinions. Good or bad, I don't mind. Rock on. Just try and be kind to everybody. Bye. Fly safe.